He rode the way men row when they have been waiting a long time for a particular morning and have finally arrived at it. Steady, unhurried, his hands rough and calloused from years that had taken more than they gave, gripping the oars with the quiet familiarity of a man who had worked with his hands his entire life and never once considered stopping. Beside him sat a woman who made stillness look like a choice. She watched the island ahead with the kind of calm that belongs to people who have already thought through everything and made their peace with it. Between them, on the floor of the boat, sat an old wooden chest, its surface worn smooth by time, its lock rusted shut. She broke the silence first.
Do you think
he'll recognize you? Calder kept his eyes on the island. Then, without looking at her, he spoke. His voice was low and certain, the kind of voice that had learned a long time ago that the truth does not need to be said loudly. He won't recognize me. A beat. But he'll recognize what he stole. The island drew closer, its trees dark and still against the morning sky. And on its shore, a crowd had gathered around a white-draped table and an auctioneer who had driven 2 hours from Cody to sell the most beautiful piece of land that had ever been stolen from the wrong man. Calder beached the boat without a sound. He stepped out onto the damp earth of an island he had not stood on in 3 years. He lifted the chest. He straightened his jacket. He looked at Zariah once, and she gave him the smallest nod. Then he walked into the crowd. No one recognized him at first. He had been gone long enough and arrived quietly enough that he moved through the gathered ranchers and bankers and county officials like a man who belonged to none of them, which was exactly what he needed. He found a position near the water's edge, set the chest down beside his boots, and waited. The auctioneer called the opening bid. Numbers climbed. Hands raised. Ransom Pike Ashford stood at the back of the clearing in a pressed suit and polished shoes, watching with the particular expression of a man who has already decided the outcome. He raised his hand. A quiet voice near the water raised it higher. Ransom raised again. The quiet voice answered him again, unhurried, unbothered, the way a man bids when the money is not the point. The gavel came down. Ransom crossed the clearing in 6 strides. "Who are you?" Calder did not answer immediately. He reached into his jacket pocket and laid a single business card on the white-draped table. Voss and Vale Enterprises. Ransom stared at it. The name meant nothing to him. He looked up, ready to dismiss this stranger the way he dismissed most people who stood between him and what he wanted. And then his eyes dropped to the chest on the ground beside the man's boots. He stopped. He knew that chest. It had sat on the floor of his father's study for as long as he could remember, in the corner beside the old roll-top desk, and Thaddeus had never once let anyone open it or move it or ask about it. It was the one thing in that house that had never belonged to Ransom in any sense of the word, and it was sitting on the grass of the island his father had just lost, beside the boots of a stranger whose name he did not know. His mouth opened. Then his eyes moved from the chest back to the face, and something in the alignment of jaw and brow and the particular quality of those ice-blue eyes broke through the 3 years and the city living and the expensive suit and landed in a place in Ransom's memory that he had not visited since a quiet Wyoming evening when he had said certain words in front of certain people and watched a man's life come apart. He had not thought about that evening very often. Men like Ransom rarely revisit the damage they leave behind. But standing here now, on this island, with this chest at this man's feet, the evening came back to him with a clarity that no amount of time or distance had managed to dissolve. His face did something it very rarely did. It lost its certainty. Calder looked at him for a long, unhurried moment. He picked up the chest, and without a word, he walked past Ransom to the center of the clearing and did not look back. Before we go back to where this story really began, tell us in the comments what town or city you are watching from today. And if you believe that every action carries a consequence, hit that subscribe button and join our community before the next case opens. 3 years earlier, the Ashford Ranch was the kind of place that made men believe in the idea of legacy. It stretched across the rolling plains outside Cody, Wyoming, a sea of golden grass under a sky so wide it seemed to swallow the horizon. The land had been in the Ashford family for generations, built by sweat, stubbornness, and the kind of loyalty that was becoming harder and harder to find in the world. And at the heart of it all was Thaddeus Crow Ashford, a man whose name carried the weight of respect in every corner of the county. Thaddeus was 72 that summer. his face lined with the kind of wrinkles that came from a life spent outdoors, his body still strong despite the years. He had a presence about him that made men stand a little straighter when he entered a room. But for all his reputation, the truth was that Thaddeus Ashford had a secret. The man he loved like a son was not his by blood. It was Calder Voss Mercer. Calder had come to the ranch when he was just a boy. His parents, ranchers themselves, had been killed in a winter storm when he was 10. Thaddeus had found him sitting on the steps of the general store in Sheridan, his small frame shaking with cold and grief. Without a word, Thaddeus had lifted him onto his horse and taken him home. The Ashford Ranch became Calder's world. He learned to ride before he could read, to track cattle before he could do long division. Thaddeus taught him that a man's word was his bond, that honor was not just a word but a way of life. And in the quiet moments, when the two of them sat on the porch after a long day's work, Thaddeus would talk about the future. "This land," he would say, gesturing to the rolling hills and endless sky, "will be yours one day, son." Calder never doubted it. Not once. For 20 years, Calder worked the ranch like it was already his. He rose before dawn, worked until the sun dipped below the mountains, and never once complained. He was the kind of man who fixed what was broken, who mended fences and soothed nervous horses with the same quiet patience. The other hands respected him. The town trusted him. And Thaddeus loved him like the son he had never had. Calder was family. And in Thaddeus's mind, the ranch would one day be his. But then Ransom Pike Ashford came home. Ransom had left Wyoming at 19, chasing the promise of quick money and easier living in Dallas. He was 42 now, a man whose face had been softened by city life, but whose eyes still carried the sharpness of someone who knew how to get what he wanted. He returned to Cody with a suitcase full of expensive clothes and a head full of schemes, his charm as polished as his shoes. But beneath the surface, there was something hollow about him, the kind of emptiness that came from a life spent taking rather than earning. Ransom had always been his father's disappointment. Where Calder was steady, Ransom was restless. Business ventures had collapsed. Marriages had failed. Debts had piled up. And when he heard that Thaddeus's health was beginning to take a turn for the worse, he saw his chance. Not out of love for his father, but out of desperation. The ranch was his last hope, and he was not above manipulating his own father to get it. At first, Ransom was careful. He did not openly criticize Calder. Instead, he planted seeds of doubt. Little comments dropped into conversation like poison in a well. You would think a man who has been here this long would have his own place by now. He would say to Thaddeus over dinner, his voice light, his meaning clear. Or, funny how the books never seem to balance right when Calder is the one handling them. Thaddeus, a man who had spent a lifetime trusting his instincts, began to waver. The doubts were small at first, barely noticeable. But they grew, fed by Ransom's whispers and the natural paranoia of a man getting older. Then came Cody Founders Day. The annual celebration brought the entire town together. Music and food and the kind of easy warmth that settled over a community when it gathered in one place and remembered what it was. Calder had been to every one of these celebrations for 20 years. He had always belonged here. This year would be the last time he ever felt that way. Thaddeus stood up in front of everyone he had ever known. His face was tight, his voice unsteady with something that was not quite anger and not quite grief, but lived in the space between the two. He said the books had been showing irregularities, said money had gone missing from the ranch accounts, said that after looking into it, the only person with both the access and the motive was Calder Voss Mercer. The words landed like a physical blow. Calder stood very still. He felt the air change around him, felt the eyes of people he had worked beside and eaten with and trusted for 2 decades shift from him to each other and back again. He waited for someone to speak, for the foreman who had worked beside him for 20 years to say something, for the cook who had slipped him extra biscuits at breakfast since he was a boy, for the old-timer who had taught him to play poker in the bunkhouse on slow winter nights. No one spoke, not one person, and in that silence, Calder understood something about belonging that he had never understood before. It was not something you built over years. It was something that could be taken from you in a single sentence by the right mouth in front of the right crowd. He left Cody that night. He did not say goodbye. There was nothing left to say it to. He did not go far at first. He drifted, taking odd jobs where he could find them, construction in Cheyenne, a stint breaking horses in Colorado. He kept to himself, speaking only when necessary, his heart too heavy for small talk. The betrayal had cut deep, but it was the loss of Thaddeus's faith that truly broke him. He had spent his life believing in the idea of loyalty, of promises kept and words honored. And now he was not sure he believed in any of it anymore. Then he met Zariah. It happened in Nashville, a city that hummed with a different kind of energy than the open plains of Wyoming. Calder had taken a job working construction on a new development. A charity fundraiser for underprivileged youth had drawn the city's elite to a downtown venue that Thursday evening. The foreman had insisted. Calder, never one to refuse a direct request, had reluctantly agreed. He was not dressed for the occasion. His boots were scuffed, his jeans faded, his shirt a little too tight across the shoulders. He stood at the edge of the room with a glass of whiskey, watching the crowd with the detached interest of a man who did not belong. And then he saw her. Zariah Vale Baptiste did not simply enter a room. She commanded it, the kind of woman who made the space around her rearrange itself without asking. She moved through the crowd with a grace that came not from performance, but from a woman who had long since stopped needing anyone's approval. She had grown up poor in New Orleans, her mother working double shifts at a diner, her father long gone. She had clawed her way up through local pageants and modeling jobs in Houston until she broke into the high-fashion world. But she had never let success sand down the edges that hard years had put on her. She knew the value of hard work. She could spot a liar before he finished his sentence. Their eyes met across the room. Neither looked away. Then Zariah excused herself from her conversation and walked directly toward him. "You look like a man who doesn't belong here," she said, her voice smooth, her smile knowing. Calder took a sip of his whiskey. "I don't." She tilted her head, studying him. "Then why are you?" He did not have an answer, so he just shrugged. Zariah did not press. Instead, she asked him about himself. And Calder, who had spent months barely speaking to anyone, found himself talking. Not about the ranch, not about Thaddeus or Ransom or the betrayal. About the land, about the way the sun rose over the plains, about the quiet satisfaction of a hard day's work. And Zariah listened, her eyes never leaving his, as if she understood the weight of the things he was not saying. When the night was over, Zariah did something no one had done in a long time. She believed him. It was not immediate. Calder did not pour out his heart that first night. But over the weeks that followed, as they met for coffee and walks and quiet dinners, he opened up. He told her everything. The ranch, Thaddeus, the promise, the public accusation, the silence of everyone who should have spoken. And when he was done, Zariah did not offer platitudes. She did not offer pity. She looked at him and said the words that had been missing from his life for too long. "I believe you." That was the love story. Not attraction, belief. It was Zariah who saw what he could not yet see in himself. Calder had skills that the modern world still paid for, skills built over 20 years on a Wyoming ranch. He knew leather the way a surgeon knows a scalpel. He could craft a saddle or a belt or a pair of boots with a quality that no factory floor could touch. Zariah had fashion connections, a network of designers and boutiques who valued craftsmanship as much as they valued story. Wyoming craftsmanship meeting modern luxury was not just a business idea. It was a statement about what endures. They started small. A workshop in the back of a rented space in Nashville's warehouse district. At first, orders trickled in. Then word spread. The quality was undeniable. Within a year, they had a waiting list. Within 2, they were shipping across the country. The brand, Voss and Vale, became synonymous with luxury that carried the soul of the frontier. Calder and Zariah did not become wealthy overnight, but they became something, and that something had been built from nothing with their own hands, and it was theirs completely, and no one could take the credit for it but them. Meanwhile, back in Wyoming, Ransom Ashford was proving what Breach and Balance viewers already know, that some men carry their consequences inside them from the beginning. All they need is enough time and enough rope. After Thaddeus's health declined further, Ransom had convinced his father to sign over the ranch. Thaddeus, his mind clouded by years of carefully planted doubt and his own failing health, had agreed. The deed was transferred. The ranch was Ransom's. He did not know what to do with it. Ransom had never been a rancher. He did not understand the land and did not want to. To him, the ranch was simply an asset waiting to be liquidated. So he began selling it off, piece by piece. The grazing land first, then the prize bulls, then the equipment. The money moved through his hands like water. Gambling, lavish parties, investments and schemes that promised fast returns and delivered only debt. The fences went unrepaired. The cattle grew thin. The hands, sensing the end, left one by one. The ranch that had thrived under 3 generations of Ashfords began to collapse under the weight of the one man it had never been built for. And then the bank came calling. The debts had outrun him. The ranch was leveraged past saving, and when the payments came due, there was nothing left to cover them. The bank foreclosed. The auction was set for an early spring morning, by Ransom's own arrangement, hoping to attract the biggest possible bids and walk away with enough to start over somewhere. The auction would be held on the island, the most beautiful and most coveted piece of the entire Ashford property. The place where an old man had once spread a hand-drawn map on a picnic table and told a 15-year-old boy that all of it would belong to him one day. Ransom did not know Calder would be there. He had not recognized the name Voss and Vale when the registered bidder paperwork came through. He was not thinking about Calder at all. He was thinking about the money. He was about to be reminded that some debts are not financial. The morning of the auction arrived cold and clear. Ransom stood at the back of the gathered crowd, his suit pressed, his hands clenched at his sides, his face wearing the careful expression of a man trying to look like he was not watching the only thing in the world he was watching. He had positioned himself to control this outcome the way he had positioned himself to control every outcome since he came back to Wyoming. He was good at that. He had always been good at that. He was not good enough. The bidding climbed. A quiet man near the water's edge, dark jacket, an old wooden chest sitting on the grass beside his boots, kept raising his hand, kept matching Ransom's bids, kept going past them, calmly, without hesitation, without any of the tells that most bidders showed when the numbers started to matter. The gavel came down. The island was sold to Voss and Vale Enterprises. Ransom crossed the clearing in 6 strides. He demanded a name. He got a business card instead. The name on it still meant nothing. But the chest on the ground beside the man's boots stopped every thought in his head. He knew that chest. It had sat on the floor of his father's study for 30 years, in the corner beside the old roll-top desk, and Thaddeus had never once let anyone open it or move it or ask about it. It was the one thing in that house that had carried the unmistakable quality of something protected, something saved for a specific person in a specific moment, and Ransom had understood from childhood that neither of those things was him. His eyes moved from the chest to the face. 3 years had changed the surface. But some things are older than surfaces. The jaw, the set of the brow, the particular quality of ice-blue eyes that had never once looked at Ransom with anything other than the quiet knowledge of exactly what he was. Those eyes had not changed. They had simply been waiting. Ransom opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Calder looked at him for a long, unhurried moment. Long enough to let the weight of what had been built and lost and rebuilt settle fully into the space between them. Long enough for Ransom to understand, without a single word being spoken, that what he was looking at was not a ghost, and not a coincidence, and not a man who had come here for money. Then Calder picked up the chest. He carried it to the center of the clearing, to the exact spot where Thaddeus had once sat beside him with a hand-drawn map, and said, "This is yours, son. All of it." He knelt. His hands moved to the lock. "Now, here is what you need to understand about this moment. You have watched a man be stripped of everything. His home, his name, his father's trust, the silence of an entire town. And you watched him rebuild from nothing, quietly, with skill and patience and the love of a woman who saw what no one else had bothered to look for. You watched the man who took everything from him run it into the ground with the predictable thoroughness of someone who had never understood the value of what they were holding. And now, on the same island where a promise was first made, on the ground he just bought back with money he earned with his own hands, Calder Voss Mercer is opening a chest that belonged to the only father he ever had. He lifted out a photograph first. A young Calder, 15 years old, standing beside Thaddeus on this exact stretch of island shore, both of them grinning at the camera with the uncomplicated joy of a day that had asked nothing of either of them except to be present. Calder's throat tightened. He remembered how Thaddeus had ruffled his hair that afternoon and said, "You are a good man, Calder. The best this ranch has ever seen." Next came the map. Frayed at the edges, the ink faded but still legible. The Ashford Ranch drawn in Thaddeus's own hand. The island marked with a small, careful X. Calder traced the lines with one finger, remembering the kitchen table and the smell of coffee and the way Thaddeus had looked at him across it. Then the horseshoe, cold and heavy in his palm, the iron worn smooth with time. It had come from his first horse, a wild Mustang he had broken himself when he was barely a boy. Thaddeus had pressed it into his hands the morning after and said nothing, because some things did not need words. And finally, the letter. The paper was yellowed with age, the ink slightly smudged as though the hand that wrote it had hesitated more than once before finishing. Calder unfolded it carefully, his hands not quite steady. "Calder," it began, "if you are reading this, know that you became the son I never deserved. The land was always meant to be yours. I let doubt cloud my judgment, and for that, I am sorry. But never doubt that I loved you like my own. Forgive an old man his weaknesses, and know that, in the end, the truth always finds its way home." He read it twice, then a third time, not because the words were unclear, because he needed them to be real. The letter had been written before Ransom came back, before any of it, before the manipulation, before Founders Day, before the silence of every person who should have spoken and did not. Thaddeus had known, in the quiet part of himself that no amount of whispered doubt had ever fully reached. He had always known. He had loved Calder before the doubt arrived. He had never stopped. He had simply been too old and too tired and too successfully deceived to hold on to what he knew when it mattered most. Calder's vision blurred. The paper crumpled slightly in his grip. Zariah placed her hand on his shoulder. She had come every step of this road with him, from the darkness of Nashville construction sites to the light of this island on this morning, and she understood that this was not a moment for words. Her hand said everything that words would have only made smaller. Calder stood. He looked out past the water toward the ranch on the far bank, its fences repaired now under new management, its pastures green again, its future belonging once more to the man it had always been meant for. Behind him, somewhere at the edge of the clearing, Ransom Ashford stood with a business card in his hand and nothing left to say and nowhere left to go. The karma in this story did not arrive with noise. It arrived the way truth always arrives when you have been patient enough to wait for it, quietly, completely, and permanent. Calder did not look back at him. Some men do not deserve to be the last thing you see when justice finally arrives. He did not speak of revenge. There was no triumph in his voice. Only the quiet resolution of a man who had carried the truth long enough that it had finally become lighter than everything else. "I never wanted revenge," he said at last. He looked toward the ranch, toward the land that was his again, toward the horizon that Thaddeus had once pointed to and called his future. "I just wanted a promise to mean something." The words moved out across the water and dissolved into the morning. The lake was still. The island was quiet. The sky held everything it had always held. And for the first time in a long time, Calder Voss Mercer felt at peace. If you stayed until the end, thank you. More stories from Breach and Balance are already on your screen. Click one now. And if you have not subscribed yet, do not miss what is coming next. See you there.